Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for AmeriCorps 101, Pre-Service Paperwork and eGrants Enrollment. Whether you're brand new or here to be cross-trained or looking for a refresher, we appreciate you taking the time to hear this spiel again, because this is important. These will be all of the steps that we need to take before we enroll somebody in the eGrants portal to be an AmeriCorps member. So our roadmap is really easy this time around. Today, again, we're going to talk about pre-service paperwork and how to enroll somebody in eGrants. And then tomorrow at 2:15 Eastern, we're going to talk about timekeeping, suspensions, and what to do at the end of service. So all of the upkeep that you have to do throughout the year. I'm going to talk a little bit about eligibility documentation, what things we need to collect and copy for a member's documentation for their file. Tori is going to walk you through the criminal history check basics, but also the most common things we see that go wrong with that process. And then finally, we'll come back to me. We'll talk a little bit about the member contract and position descriptions, but then I'm going to walk you through eGrants enrollment. Again, this is going to be a lot of information. We don't expect everybody to remember everything that we talk about here today. We will be recording this for our YouTube channel. There already are a lot of great little 5-minute snippet videos about all of these different steps on our YouTube channel, the YouthBuild AmeriCorps channel. So yeah, we'll get you there. So this is our flow chart, and Lauren's going to share that in the chat with you. It's a lot, right? This is the roadmap of all the documentation and all the work that you have to do to make sure that members are registered as AmeriCorps members and then ultimately get that education award at the end of their term of service. It looks a little overwhelming, but we're going to go through each step the next 2 days. Some of these steps are very easy. Some are a lot more complicated. So let's start with the first row here. We're going to talk about this hour, everything that happens in these first 4 bubbles before you actually enroll them. So let's go to bubble number 1. This is probably the easiest one. Every member has to have an application. We need to document and demonstrate that there was an enrollment process for AmeriCorps members. Now, every program here on the line probably has their own YouthBuild application. And the expectation is not that you add an extra AmeriCorps application to that, though we do have a template for that. Your application, now that you're a YouthBuild AmeriCorps program, just has to meet a few requirements. First of which, it has to mention AmeriCorps. It has to have the logo on it. And ideally, the updated logo, not the logo that's on this screen. People should know what they're signing up for, not just YouthBuild, but AmeriCorps as well. So that's why that's important. There also has to be notice of the NSCHC requirement. So unique to this grant is the criminal history checks that go along with it. And people need to know right on Front Street that they're going to need to go through that process in order to be eligible for AmeriCorps participation. Finally, some questions need to be included that will feed later into your performance measures. We need to know who has a GED and a high school diploma at entry. We need to know their employment status at entry and their status as an economically disadvantaged youth. So again, these are things that you're collecting for other funders and other initiatives. So none of this is really all that hard. So that's one bubble down, really easy. We're going to bog you down a little bit more on this second bubble because again, there are certain requirements, certain eligibility requirements to be an AmeriCorps member. And we have to not only review these, but we have to document them. So we need to save them for their file. So first, I'll talk about the first couple, and then we'll let Tori get into the weeds with the rest. So first off, we have to be able to document their age. YouthBuild is open to young people 16 to 25. AmeriCorps is open to much more than that, but for our grant, it's 16 years of age to 25 years of age. So we have to have that documented. We have to also demonstrate that they're a U.S. citizen, a U.S. national, or have legal permanent resident status. And then finally, we have to have all the documentation around the National Service Criminal History Check. So first off, age. Members should be 17 at the time of enrollment or 16 if enrolling in a program for economically disadvantaged youth, so YouthBuild. The most common things we see here are birth certificates or some other sort of government-issued ID, whether it's a state ID or a driver's license or a passport. Some young people have passports, so that's great. Once we've collected this, copied it for the file, we're going to use what's called the Eligibility Verification form. We refer to this as the EVF form. It's available for download on our website. And what this form does is it inventories every step of this process. And it's so important to have as a backup record of, hey, I checked this. Yeah, I verified that. So as we go through all these steps today, we're going to keep coming back to the EVF form and tell you what needs to be done for it. Here, we're going to be checking off what age the individual is at the start of service and what documents we use to verify that age. There's also a section here for consent by parents and legal guardians. I mean, if that parent is available, you could have them sign off on the EVF, but we'll actually have them sign the member contract later. So really here, you can just indicate who it was that signed the member contract. I've seen that confuse people in the past, so I just wanted to mention that. All right, and then citizenship. So the way the laws were written in the 90s for AmeriCorps is that this is an opportunity for those who are citizens or legal permanent residents. So yeah, we have to document that. Most common we see is a birth certificate showing birth in the US, a US passport if a young person has that, or a green card, also known as a permanent resident card. Now, Social Security cards don't demonstrate that someone is a citizen of the United States. You can have a Social Security number and not be a citizen. So we do ask that you collect those because you'll be entering that Social Security number in a number of different places and it has to be right, or it's going to cause a lot of trouble later. But they don't work for this step. All right, so work authorization cards or authorization to study in the United States, they do not demonstrate eligibility to serve in AmeriCorps, and they can look very similar to a permanent resident card. So when you're collecting this documentation from young people, make sure you're taking a good look at it because, yeah, this doesn't help our case at all because they have to either be born here, be a naturalized citizen, or a permanent resident at the time of enrollment. And this has to be demonstrated with clear documentation and clear, not only the right documentation, but make sure you're taking really good copies of that because we may have to verify with eGrants later by sending in that documentation. And if the folks there can't read it, it's not going to help either. So, all right. So once we've collected our proof of age, our proof of citizenship, we're going to indicate that again on the EVF. And on this side of the EVF, of the 2-page form, we're going to sign off that, we certify that, yep, this is how old this young person was, and this was their citizenship status, and we're going to date that as well. Now, this date could be well before you actually enroll them in the portal, and it's important that this date is different from the date you're going to put on the other side. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, so once you have all that together, you're ready to move into the most unique of eligibility processes, which is the National Service Criminal History Check. And I'm going to let Tori talk about that.
Sure. So the third part is the eligibility requirement on this outline is the National Service Criminal History Check. And it is gravely important to get this part right. We are going to take a detailed look so that everyone walks away ready to successfully implement or continue this work at your program. A quick note about terminology. Throughout this webinar, I'll be using the term NSCHC. It's very important to keep in mind that when we say NSCHC, we're talking specifically about this 3-part process to determine whether someone is eligible to serve or work in AmeriCorps. This should not be confused with the term background check, which is a very general term and could mean a number of other different things, or another criminal history check that may be used at your organization or in your state. The three parts of the NSCHC are as follows. First, the National Sex Offender Check, which we'll call NSOPW. The second, the state of service or work and state residency checks, which we'll call state checks, and the FBI fingerprint check, or the FBI check. So who needs an NSCHC? Anyone who is in a covered position is required to have an NSCHC. It does not matter what role they have. If they are an accountant or executive director that never sees members, if they are in a covered position, they need an NSCHC. For staff, it also does not matter if they will be supported on the expense side or the match side or both. If they are on your AmeriCorps budget, we will need to follow the procedures of conducting the NSCHC. In addition to all covered positions, all members that are 18 years of age or older at the time of enrollment need an NSCHC. If a member is under the age of 18 on their start date, they are exempt from the criminal history check requirement. Okay, so what are we looking for when we're running these checks? There are two types of offenses stated here that would disqualify someone from an AmeriCorps covered position. This may not disqualify someone from participating at or working for your YouthBuild program, but they cannot serve or work for AmeriCorps. On the other hand, your program can add additional standards for eligibility related to criminal history, as long as it meets the first two minimum requirements and follows all applicable federal, state, and local laws. Great. So now, how do we run these checks? They're run through two AmeriCorps approved vendors, TrueScreen for NSOPW and state checks, and FieldPrint for the FBI fingerprint check. So TrueScreen runs the NSOPW and state check, and it's intended to be simple and streamlined. The benefit to using this system is that programs can be certain that checks are run compliantly and, for the most part, on time. Using TrueScreen, it will prevent disallowance for many programs. Other things to note about this system is that it's a name-based search and requires a member to go through an online setup process, and it also provides conviction data to the program when it's applicable. Just a quick note, there are many states where TrueScreen, for one reason or another, cannot get state check results. So for these states, AmeriCorps has alternative search procedures, or ASPs. Additionally, NFF states are states where state-related criminal history information is shared with the FBI check. So it's unnecessary to run the state check for NFF states. Pretty much, if your program, an ASP state or NFF state, you will be using TrueScreen solely to properly run and document the NSOPW check, and you will not need the state check. So the TrueScreen process is a very detailed process. Lauren covered it a little bit before, but we are going to provide a little bit more of a detailed walkthrough of it. And just to note, we have support documentation and guides that go into greater detail as well. So we'll first, you'll order the NSOPW and state checks. To order, you will provide the email of the applicant, the anticipated start date, whether the individual has access to vulnerable populations or not. Second, an email will automatically be sent to the individual applicant to create an account. The applicant will create an account and complete identification forms, sign off on agreements and disclosures, and upload their ID. After the application is complete, TrueScreen will automatically run the checks and provide a recommendation according to AmeriCorps eligibility criteria. TrueScreen will notify you when the results have been returned. Usually this is within 1 to 5 business days. You must review the results and then enter a final adjudication decision into the TrueScreen system. The check is not complete until you enter that final adjudication decision. Failure to adjudicate may result in a non-compliant check and you may incur financial consequences. So FieldPrint is the other approved vendor and runs the FBI fingerprint checks. Appointments are scheduled online and results only show a clear or not clear result. In a moment, we'll go through a more detailed process about how to run these checks. So first, you'll provide your fingerprint code to the applicant, which is obtained when setting up an account. The applicant will set up an account, complete their information, sign off on agreements, and set up their live screen fingerprint appointment. The applicant will be fingerprinted at their live scan appointment, and the applicant and program staff will receive an email notification when the results are returned. In most cases, this should not take more than a couple business days. Then program staff can log into their client portal to view the results of the check. Next, you will adjudicate the check in the system. If the applicant received a cleared status, you will check the FBI section on the EVF as cleared, and you can move forward. If the applicant received a not cleared status, you should contact your portfolio manager to seek additional support. You must retain documentation of the check. Proof of checks run and adjudication in FieldPrint should be retained for at least 7 years. You can log into your client portal at any time to view the status of any of the individuals who have used your FieldPrint code. Results will be available for you to print for 7 years from the date of the check. All 3 NSOPW, state, FBI check need to be completed prior to the start of service. Specifically, adjudication must be completed at least 1 day prior to the start date, meaning you reviewed and passed the results of each check in each system and on the EVF before the start date. How often must we get NSCHCs done for staff or members? It's a one-time process. As long as an individual is continuously employed or serving with a gap no more than 180 days. Okay, yeah, so we're moving right along. We're going to talk about common pitfalls of the NSCHC process so that we can always strive to do better. So not running checks on time, getting names wrong, failure to adjudicate on time or at all, not keeping background documentation are all common ways where we're messing up this process. And because we've identified these areas as risk areas, we're going to spend a little bit of time to talk about each. Like we said before, NSOPW, state, and FBI checks must be completed and adjudicated at least 1 day before the member start date. This is very important and a common mistake. Copying members' name wrong incorrectly into the system is another common mistake. Names must match the most recent government issued photo ID. What this means is that you will use the member's first and last name and do not use their middle name. Common mistakes we see are adding periods, dashes, extra spaces, hyphens, and these additional add-ons do not match the member ID. Failure to adjudicate, like Lauren said in the earlier session, is a common mistake. Getting results returned with a recommendation from TrueScreen and FieldPrint is not sufficient, and adjudication needs to be done in each system and on the EVF. We will go through in more detail on what it looks like to adjudicate in both systems soon. And lastly, maintaining proper documentation of checks is another issue. It's important to keep documentation of checks run and checks adjudicated. Like we said before, TrueScreen and FieldPrint keep documentation for 7 years. So here we are in TrueScreen on the cover page. You can see under the description of the services that NSOPW is the first check run and the state check is underneath it. The program will then review the details of each check before they make their decision. So the second page has adjudication information. You can see that the program went in and viewed the results of the checks and adjudicated with a pass from the drop-down menu. Below the pass field, TrueScreen records a timestamp of the pass and the name of the person who adjudicated the results. Both the cover page and adjudication page should be kept on file for this true screen check. So in field print now, for the FBI check, you will first log into my fitness determination page to view the results. You will see that on this check, the results came back with a cleared status. Once viewed, you'll close out of this module, and then you'll see that the above fields indicated by the arrow will auto-populate with the viewed fitness determination date and the name of the person who went in and viewed the results. Then you'll navigate to the My Fingerprint module and make your adjudication decision. You will also notice that the fields have auto-populated after leaving the My Fitness Determination module. And once you make your adjudication decision, pass or fail, a timestamp and the name will also automatically be recorded in the system once you close out of this module. So then you've closed out of the My Fingerprints module after making your adjudication decision, and you'll go back into the My Fitness Determination module. And here we have everything we need to keep on file for the FBI check. And we can see that there is a cleared status at the bottom there, when it was viewed and by whom, and an adjudication decision was made as pass, and when the decision was determined was also dated and by whom. So the very last step in our process of documentation of NSCHCs is to complete the eligibility verification form. It is best practice to fill and sign the EVF the same day the checks have been adjudicated. So for a cleared member with adjudicated results, you will mark the first two boxes: that the individual was provided a reasonable opportunity to review and challenge the factual accuracy of the results, and the individual has been deemed eligible for participation in national service covered position. The last thing is for staff to sign off and date the very bottom.
Let's talk about that member contract. So every young person, every time they sign up for a slot for a service opportunity, they need to have a member contract. Now, this is something we create a new template for every year, because every year they add a couple new little requirements to the language, and we make sure that all of that gets included in this template. So this member contract includes all that required language and everything by law that you have to have in the member service agreement. So consent for the national criminal history check, even though that's built into the true screen and field print processes now, it doesn't hurt to have it documented somewhere else. You have to have a detailed grievance procedure. So we put kind of like a dummy summary in there. A lot of the things you'll see in the template will be in red text. And these are the sections that you really need to personalize and tailor to your program's processes. So yeah, that grievance procedure should reflect what you actually do at the program, but it needs to include time limits and binding arbitration, because those two terms are mentioned in the regulations. It also has to have mention of a civil rights and non-discrimination policy, the terms and benefits of service. This is important. And again, this is why we update it each year, because those education awards, the main benefit of service, they always go up a little bit each year now. So you want to make sure you're using the right year. So right here, we have the 2020-21. This is not the correct one for this year. And then also the member media release. You guys send us photos and we put them out on social media and we use them in everything. So again, it has to be personalized each year. It has to be attached to your position description, which we're going to talk to in a moment. And then it has to be reviewed and signed by both staff members and the member themselves. So this is really important. In a world where we're all used to just accepting the terms and agreements of every little app we want to use on our phone, this could be a really good teaching moment during mental toughness, where we're like, hey, we're signing you up for something. Let's go through this contract and really read and understand what we're signing up for. And again, if any changes need to be made, you're going to strike through them and initial them, both the staff and the member, because this is a contract. So again, we don't want to just be changing things. All right. An important part of the member contract, particularly now, since May 1st, when we don't have to run checks for young people under the age of 18, is the parental consent. Now, this is included in every member contract. It only really needs to be signed off on for those members who are under 18 at the time of signing up. So you can leave this blank for anybody who's in their 20s that sign up for your program. But yeah, this is super important. We have to have that consent by a parent or a legal guardian before they enter into this agreement for a year of service or a term of service. It's super important. So make sure that you're getting that. We'll definitely be looking for that, especially for those young people that you're not running checks on. All right, and then position description. So each year, we also update these templates. These are descriptions of what type of service your young person is going to do that year. So we have some approved service tracks, some approved primary service tracks. So construction, obviously, some programs do digital divide, which is like IT service, community health and wellness. If you have a healthcare track at your YouthBuild program, some programs have been approved to also have that as an AmeriCorps service track. Recycling and conservation, culinary is a new one for us. I believe we only have 2 programs that do that now. You need to review this with the young people. You need to update this each year with details of what that young person is going to do at your program. You're actually going to send that in to your portfolio manager each year. We review it, have a discussion with you about it, and then file it away. It's important, again, to go over this during mental toughness so young people understand what they're signing up for, providing them a copy of it, but you also need to keep a copy of it in the file because it is one of the only ways that we document what particular service that young person did. So it's important to make sure that you do keep a copy in the file. And then we also have full-time members. A handful of programs across the network also have this resource. There are 3 approved tracks right now. These might be different. All this might be different in the next 3 years. Right now, you can only have full-time members that are education team leaders, construction or digital divide, service trainers, and community partnership team leaders. Those have to be very carefully tailored and included in their documentation as well. All right, so that's all the paperwork. We've gotten it all together. Now we're going to sit down with the eGrants system and enroll them as AmeriCorps members. So what is the eGrant system? It's a web-based grant management system. There's a lot of different things that you can do for it. It's how we submit the network grant application every 3 years. You're going to use it to manage your members. It's administered by AmeriCorps. It's not run by YouthBuild USA. We do have some permissions to help out in that system on a limited basis, but they also have a really great help desk. So a lot of times if you're having trouble with eGrants, you can send us an email and a question. We might be able to help, but a lot of times we'll refer you to the help desk because they have permissions to change things that are wrong that we do not. So it's accessed by sub-grantees, so your program, the prime grantees, YouthBuild USA in this case, of our national direct grant, and AmeriCorps themselves. So everything that you enter into there, all 3 of these entities can see. And it's also linked to My AmeriCorps. So My AmeriCorps is the members side of this system, and it's the system that they will use to someday access the award that they earned through their service. So again, this is not run by YouthBuild USA. This is a separate and distinct system than the YouthBuild data system, or DYB. So DYB, you or another staff person at your program is going to use to report on your successes and your progress towards your objectives that you set each year. You're going to tell us some great stories about maybe your national service days. That happens in the data YouthBuild system. That's how you talk to us. The eGrant system is primarily just to register your members as AmeriCorps members and then exit them out someday, hopefully, with an award. So they don't talk to each other. Sometimes it requires some additional data entry that you've already put in DYB. We'll talk a little bit about how to enroll a member in eGrants next. Again, once all of this stuff is done and all your paperwork is in order. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but we have a lot of great resources again on the YouthBuild AmeriCorps YouTube channel. So you'll actually have a little 3-minute videos like, hey, you're signing somebody up. Let's do it together right here in the video. Okay, so here's a summary of the steps. Many of these steps are managed by your staff. Some are managed by eGrants itself, and then some have to involve the member. So first, we're going to invite our member in eGrants. That's the first step. It's a pretty easy process. You can do that as early as application if you want to, because you can invite as many people as you want. The only ones that ultimately matter that you'll be responsible for documenting for 7 years are the ones you actually enroll. The member is going to accept an invite in their email inbox because you're going to enter their email address, and then they're going to fill out their own enrollment form. So we're going to take a look at what that looks like. Some of you who've been around a long time know that we used to do this for them, but that's no longer allowed. So while all those processes are happening, they cue the eGrant system to start talking to some other systems to verify the social security number that you entered. So again, this is why we ask you to collect and keep that card, because getting that number correct is really important. And it's also going to verify their citizenship. And then once all that is done, great, you're going to be able to do the final piece, which is just entering in their official AmeriCorps start date and then enrolling them in your program. All right, so let's see what that looks like. So first, invite the member. So this is really easy. You were just plugging in their names, their social security numbers. You're going to do that twice, again, because it's so important that that number gets entered correctly. Their date of birth, their email address. So again, it's really important that they have an email address that they use and check. A lot of programs that have been doing this for a long time set them up with a professional email address as part of mental toughness. So that would be the one they would use here. This is also the email address they're going to use to access their award someday. So it's important to have a good one. The program year. So we often talk about the program year being like 2020 to 21 or 21, 22. In eGrants, it's always the year that the grant started. Right now, we would be in the 2021 grant year, even though it's February of 2022. Program title, really easy. You're only going to have access to one, yours, and then the service location, which in many cases is just the name of your program again. All right, so once you've done that, you send that off, you can fire like, again, 10 or 20 of those in the span of a half an hour. It's really easy. Once you've sent those, the young person is going to get this email in their inbox, probably in their spam folder, right? Because it's unlikely that they ever got an email from AmeriCorps.gov before. A lot of times, another great practice is to have the young person sitting there with a laptop next to you as you're doing this. Because, yeah, they need to click through the hyperlink in this email in order to fill out their own enrollment form. And again, this is going to be pretty easy. It's really just a lot of contact information, a couple questions about how they learned about AmeriCorps, that sort of thing. But they're also going to be setting up their account and creating a password that, again, they may not remember 5 years down the line. So a lot of seasoned programs write this down in their member file. So again, if Johnny comes back 5 years after graduating the program and wants to use this resource, it's available for 7 years. And we have the password written down to help them out. Once they save this, the eligibility verification process is initiated. So that social security number check, the citizenship check, that all starts. And in a perfect world, that turns around in a day or two. Again, just like the TrueScreen delays we've heard of some programs where this has been delayed, these automatic verifications for a couple days. I mean, definitely let us know. There's not a lot we can do about it. It's usually a day or two. Okay, so again, Per the grant terms and conditions, the applicant has to be involved in their own enrollment in eGrants. Again, if you've been in part of this for a long time, there was a time when we could do all of this for them, but that's no longer allowed. It's important that they're involved. It's important that they set up their My AmeriCorps profile. And if they ever want to serve again, like Mary mentioned before, maybe we re-enroll them in a second term of service during the time they're with us in YouthBuild, because maybe they knock out their hours really quickly. We also have to make sure that they're exited correctly or exited from whatever previous program they might have been involved with by verifying with their previous supervisor or checking their Ed Award status. LT is going to tell you all about that tomorrow. So I'm going to let that go right here. Okay. The next step you hopefully have to do anything for. This is the citizenship verification process. So once the young person has created their part of the enrollment form, then the Social Security Administration runs their eligibility check. Usually in a day or two, their status, and we'll show you what that looks like in a moment, will change from pending to all set to verified. Sometimes, maybe because a young person has one of the newer Social Security numbers, or it's unclear because maybe there's multiple records, their citizenship won't automatically get verified. In that case, you'll get an email from the National Service Trust, from My AmeriCorps. We do as well, that this young person wasn't automatically verified. And that email asks you to submit some documentation. That's a whole process. We can help with that. In some cases, we do have to document that this person is indeed a U.S. citizen. So we send those in. It's an electronic process that's very secure. And in a day or two, staff at the National Service Trust at eGrants will review that and update their status, and then you'll be able to enroll them. This is what it looks like. When it's done correctly, it tells you that that status has been verified, and it date stamps that verification. So both the Social Security and the citizenship status have to be verified. And once that date stamp gets in there, you can't enroll somebody earlier than that. So getting that process started, even before you know whether or not you're ultimately going to enroll somebody, is smart, because the sooner we can get these processes done, the earlier we can get them enrolled and prevent delays. So finally, if all of this goes well, and most of the time it really does, there was a time when all of these new things were added to eGrants where there were some delays, but it seems to be working a lot smoother. So you would finish the enrollment. So it's as easy as going into the enrollment form that you created, that the member entered into. You check those statuses to see that the Social Security number and the citizenship have been verified. And you're also going to enter a certification date for their NSCHC. Now, again, this date should match what you have on the EVF form. It should be at least a day before you sit down to enroll them as their official start date. And this is just saying that by entering this date, I'm certifying that all of these checks were done, adjudicated, and documented correctly. So when you go to do this the first time, if you're like, I don't feel comfortable doing that, give us a call. Let's talk about it. Let's review it before you hit that enroll button. Nothing is actionable until you hit that enroll button. All right. So, and again, if that young person is under 18, you can leave this blank because, again, the system is going to verify their date of birth and you're going to be fine with that. This start date, again, needs to be on or after the citizenship and Social Security number verifications were done, and at least one day after the date that you enter in as the NSCHC certification date. Once you've done all of that and you've done it correctly, you're going to go down to the bottom. You're going to put in that start date. You're going to select the program year. Again, right now we're in the 2021-22 program year. So you're going to indicate the 2021 program year. Your program title, the service location. Again, you're only going to have access to one. We have access to all of them, but this will be easy for you. And then the slot type. Most programs have quarter time or 450-hour slots. You may have a couple different ones. anyways, they'll be there in the drop-down menu. Once you've done all of that and click the box that you certify it, only then does the enroll member button then light up, right? It's kind of grayed off until that point. And if it lights up and you click that button, it'll give you a little message that this young person was enrolled successfully. Like we were saying earlier, what's an AmeriCorps start date? So this is the first day that your student is going to earn hours towards their education award as an AmeriCorps member. That does not have to be their first day of YouthBuild. And it can be different for every member, even members of the same cohort. Doesn't need to correspond to the YouthBuild start date. The date entered into eGrants should match the date you have on your paperwork, the date that you put into DYB. When things are perfect, everything matches up. So, it's important to maybe even take a moment and do a little verification of that. And you must enroll within 8 days. So this is something that causes a lot of confusion too. We have administrative windows that we're expected to keep. We have to enroll young people within 8 calendar days of their start date. We have to exit them within 30 days of their exit date. Again, LT and David are going to talk about that tomorrow. But this graphic just kind of shows you what we're talking about. So if all the paperwork and the date that you're entering into eGrants is August 17th, then you have 8 calendar days, including weekends, right? To get that, sit down with the eGrants portal at your computer and give them that enrollment date. Once we start to get into the 25th and 26th, it's not going to let you go back to August 17th. Whenever you're sitting down to do this, if you're sitting down to do multiples, it's important to keep this framework in mind because once we get into 25, 26, 27th, not only is that going to move up their start date, but you also have to fix their paperwork to reflect what has to now be put in the eGrants portal. All right, so that was a lot. Sit with it, let it steep. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all you folks that know this back and forth, but still decided to come and spend an hour with us. We'll see you tomorrow.